Hi, this is Mina Frost, General Counsel for Sano Genetics, coming back for episode 2 for all of you who are a glutton for punishment. So this is going to be episode 2 where we're talking a little bit more about the legal issues associated with precision medicine, market access, reimbursement, all of the fun topics associated with trying to get a really great medicine to patients as quickly as possible. As you know, Sano is a genetics-based SaaS platform that offers genetic testing, counseling, and other services to individuals with rare diseases and helps funnel them into clinical trials that lead to research results, outcomes, and hopefully medicines that help people on a day-to-day basis. So today, like I said, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the legal entry, the barriers to entry, some of the market access hurdles, some of the regulatory issues as well. When thinking about some of the legal hurdles to things like market access, and this ends up being an issue globally, but I think we've probably heard the most about it in the US with some additional noise coming out of the EU. There are obviously lots of different ways to get medicines to market. In the US, it's slightly different to get them reimbursed. They have to qualify under the government to get onto the reimbursement page for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. But then obviously, there's obviously the massive insurance industry in the US, which is very different than the European system where the government decides what gets reimbursed. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about what those issues are. And I hope you enjoy. So the first sort of legal hurdle always, I feel like these days, is sort of around data privacy and security. Precision medicine relies heavily on vast amounts of patient data, including genetic information, medical records, and lifestyle factors. And we want to, ensure that the privacy and security of this incredibly sensitive data is always paramount in our minds. There's legal frameworks to consider, such as in the US, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, it's a mouthful, also known as HIPAA. And then there's obviously the General Data Protection Regulation out of the EU, which imposes strict requirements on data handling, storage, and sharing. Sort of adjacent, but slightly tangential, is also the issue of the informed consent that we collect as part of clinical research. Precision medicine often involves genetic testing and personalized treatments that are based on an individual's genetic makeup. And so obtaining informed consent from patients for procedures is really, really important because obviously we're getting down to some really core health information. The trick here is that ensuring patients fully understand those risks, benefits, and the implications of genetic testing and personalized medicine is tough. It can be a real challenge. Those are complicated topics for even an expert to understand. So, imagining trying to help an individual who's not necessarily familiar with the area work through what those risks and benefits are can be a real challenge to deal with. There's legal standards, obviously, around what needs to be an informed consent. And some of those things may have to be adapted to address some of the complications associated with precision medicine versus traditional medicine, which we covered last time. The other big hurdle from a market access perspective, maybe the biggest, is probably the regulatory approval that we need. So regulatory agencies in the US, such as the FDA and the European Medicines Agency in Europe, they evaluate the safety and efficacy of drugs before they can go to market. Obviously, a very complicated process normally, but precision medicine approaches, which involve targeted therapies for specific genetic subpopulations. They raise questions around traditional clinical trial design. So we may have very different clinical trial designs for precision medicine, as well as endpoints. And the regulatory frameworks are not necessarily always geared to accommodate those kinds of more complex or even just different from traditional medicine trials. So there's, having to accommodate for some of those unique precision medicine characteristics can take some more time, can take some additional conversations with those regulatory agencies in order to get to approval. So those things need to be accounted for, because we obviously don't want to compromise safety, but obviously because of the complexity of these trials, the difference in these trials between traditional medicine and precision medicine, timelines may be extended and need to be accounted for and thought through. One of the other perhaps more interesting, not always thought of, hurdles or issues that you have to consider when you're thinking about market access and reimbursement is intellectual property. Oftentimes intellectual property is associated with the value of whatever it is that's being protected, in this case, a medicine, and therefore directly contributes to sort of the value to pricing in reimbursement ratio or conversation. So definitely informs the pricing decision and then the reimbursement decision on the other side of that. So precision medicine often relies on identifying novel genetic targets. So the more unique, the more likely it's patentable, the more likely the pricing will reflect that, the potentially more likely it will be reimbursed. And securing intellectual property rights for those kinds of discoveries becomes an essential part of incentivizing investment in that kind of research and development. The patentability, however, of genetic sequences and diagnostic methods has been the subject of debate, so it's not exactly clear. We don't have any clear legal standards to determine whether or not that is a patentable, subject matter in the context of precision medicine. And I think further clarification will be needed there in order to make sure that pricing and reimbursement is accurate. And of course, if you have a novel target and a patentable medicine or process, then that often leads to extremely highly priced medicines in the context of precision medicine for these rare diseases. And that always raises the issues around equity and access for patients, whether or not individuals can afford sometimes these life-saving treatments that are very highly priced due to the amount of effort and the complexity associated with bringing it to market. But precision medicine has the potential, in fact, to exacerbate existing health disparities in healthcare access and outcomes, if not implemented equitably. So it's something that we need to keep in mind as well. And ensuring that personalized treatments are accessible to as many patients as possible, regardless of their socioeconomic status. Geographic location requires addressing barriers such as cost, insurance coverage, infrastructure to be able to get the medicines. And so there's a lot of discussion around legal frameworks around the world, frankly, not just in the Western world, needing to incorporate provisions that promote equitable access to precision medicine technologies and therapies. That this is not just for those who can pay for it, who can afford it, but rather there must be equity and justice, frankly, when it comes to access to these incredible medicines. The other legal hurdle to think about here is around liability and malpractice, a favorite topic in the US. There's a lot of medical malpractice and liability issues abound in the US and frankly everywhere else. But when you complicate that further by interpreting genetic data and implementing personalized treatments, those concerns are just elevated. Healthcare providers and genetic counselors face legal challenges all the time if patients experience adverse outcomes, or if there's any errors in genetic testing or treatment recommendations, which is always possible. And so it'll be really important as we move forward and further into this space that we clarify that standard of care and liability standards in the context of precision medicine, not just traditional medicine, to make sure that health professionals aren't facing undue risk when providing advice or recommending treatment. So when entering the market in precision medicine, specifically, we've talked about sort of market access and reimbursement, but what are some of the other issues that might come up in addition to the regulatory approval, the intellectual property, the data and privacy concerns? Precision medicine products also have to adhere to industry standards and guidelines when ensuring quality, safety, and efficacy. So that's without saying. But it is a more complicated effort than traditional medicine. So companies developing genetic tests or molecular diagnostics have to comply with standards by organizations such as that may not necessarily be relevant in traditional medicine, such as the clinical laboratory improvement amendments, also known as CLIA, and the College of American Pathologists, also known as CAP. So you'll often hear that labs involved in precision medicine are CLIA CAP certified, and those are the two bodies that are being referred to there. Adherence to professional guidelines and best practices in genetic counseling, test interpretation, treatment determination is also crucial. And so it's really important that we think about those things. And then there's a massive area, specifically with the genetic testing associated with precision medicine, which Sano does around the ethical, not just legal considerations. The precision medicine generally raises complex ethical and legal issues, again, related to informed consent, patient autonomy, genetic discrimination, data ownership, some really interesting issues to think about when considering the ethical landscape. And companies like Sano have to navigate those considerations when developing and marketing those, supporting the development and marketing of precision medicine products, making sure that they uphold ethical standards and comply with relevant laws and regulations, of course, but also making sure that we're engaging with stakeholders, most importantly, patients, healthcare providers, policymakers, advocacy groups, patient groups, to help address concerns and build trust, really, which is incredibly important for Sano, where we believe the patient comes first. Moving on to so we've talked about the legal and regulatory issues associated with market access, reimbursement, ethics. There's also some policy considerations to think about in the context of precision medicine that may be different and involve a complex range of issues that also span ethics, regulation, access, and data privacy. There's sort of the need to look at the regulatory frameworks and establishing regulatory pathways for the approval and oversight of precision medicine technologies, which may include genetic tests, biomarkers, and targeted therapies. Currently, the framework is sort of a traditional older model, and there's a case being made that new frameworks are needed to account for these not only new modalities, but also thinking through the complexity and the fast pace with which some of these technologies and modalities move. And so, when you're sort of thinking about a white pill, the modality doesn't often change with the speed with which a technology or a biomarker identification or immunology or genetic testing might do in the case of precision medicine. So, but obviously these new frameworks still have to ensure that safety and efficacy and accuracy are paramount, but while balancing the need for timely access to innovative treatments. These patients are often without a novel treatment for decades and very little advancement in these spaces. And so if we can accelerate that, then that's always all the better for the patient. The other policy issue that comes up with precision medicine is around data sharing and data privacy. As you can imagine, because precision medicine relies on large data sets, it's to the benefit of all researchers, all manufacturers of precision medicines to share data. The larger the data set, the better the result, the outcome, the indicator, the signal. And so we need to develop policies to facilitate that data sharing amongst researchers, healthcare providers, and patients, but whilst also making sure, obviously, that we're safeguarding privacy and protecting against unauthorized access to information, and maybe most importantly, the misuse of sensitive genetic and health information. We talked a little bit about equitable access, but as you can imagine, that is a massive policy issue, addressing disparities in the access of precision medicine technologies and therapies across diverse populations. So not only is it just sort of equitable across a socioeconomic framework, but also around a racial framework potentially as well. Obviously, different medicines perform differently based on the genetic makeup, the race, the backgrounds of these patients, the geographic location. So it's not just about socioeconomic status. And so making sure that we are talking about equitable access across all of those things and making sure that people are getting the medicine they need worldwide. Again, we talked a little bit around healthcare reimbursement as a legal issue, but from a policy perspective, obviously, an enormous issue, and determining reimbursement policies for precision medicine tests, diagnostic tests, treatments, including coverage decisions by public and private payers to make sure that these medicines and treatments are affordable and have widespread adoption, and that they're not being developed as sort of designer drugs for a very small population that can afford it. There's also an interesting policy issue around the education and training of the workforce. So investing in educating and training healthcare providers who may not be familiar or practiced in precision medicine per se, as well as researchers and policymakers, to make sure that everyone understands and is on the same page about what precision medicine concepts are, what the technologies are, and of course what the ethical implications are before making the important decisions that they do in their day jobs. We talked again a little bit about informed consent, but from a policy perspective, we want to make sure that people are getting comprehensive information that is easy to understand about the risks and benefits and limitations of precision medicine interventions, as well as to make sure that they are making an informed decision and that as far as participation in research and clinical trials. The intellectual property rights we again addressed from a legal perspective, from a policy perspective. There are ethical issues related to intellectual property rights, including gene patents. Am I able to obtain a patent on my own genetic sequence? Data ownership. Is this data mine? Is it somebody else's? And also to foster innovation. So, obviously the whole intellectual property regime and landscape has been set up to foster innovation, but we must do so from a policy perspective without encouraging monopolies. So we have to make sure that there's fair competition and no one person is monopolizing the space, which could restrict access to essential technologies and therapies. There's the ethical guidelines, which is always incredibly important, generally around medicine, specifically around precision medicine and clinical practice, including these considerations again about patient autonomy, benefitness, non-malfeasance, and of course, justice. From a policy perspective, there's also some health information technology issues to consider. like promoting the development and adoption of interoperable health information technology systems. If you can imagine a world where computers could actually speak to each other and in the same language, in a way that fosters data integration and analysis and decision making in precision medicine research and clinical care, the world would be a better place. So that sort of interoperability question, and making sure that everyone's sort of operating on a similar baseline, so that systems can speak to one another, is another policy consideration. And then I think maybe one of the biggest policy considerations to think about is really around international collaboration. There's been a strong move towards nationalism and isolation as of late, but really that is antithetical to what we're trying to achieve when it comes to medical research and precision medicine in particular. So we want to foster that kind of international collaboration, harmonization around standards. So we've talked a lot today about sort of the US and the EU. And you can imagine a world where global companies are in the business of creating medicine and are able to apply a single or harmonized standard to promote the global advancement of precision medicine, again, so it's not sort of restricted to a particular geographic area. The considerations around culture, ethical differences amongst countries is important as well, because not everybody has the Western perspective, but there is a lot of harmonization that can be done and should be done to promote collaboration and widespread use of this of precision medicine technologies. I also wanted to talk a little bit today about intellectual property and go a little bit deeper into some of the patent issues that are specific to precision medicine. Obviously, it plays a crucial role in precision medicine, where innovative discoveries, whether it's in genetics, biomarkers, therapeutic targets, they drive product development and a lot of investment as well. So there's some key considerations regarding intellectual property and patent issues in particular that I wanted to talk with you about today. So there's sort of this question around the patentability of the genetic sequence, which might be one of my favorite issues. It's a fundamental challenge in precision medicine, as you can imagine, is the patentability of a genetic sequence. When isolated, DNA sequences were historically patentable. However, recent court decisions in the US, including a US Supreme Court case, have narrowed that scope of patent eligibility for naturally occurring DNA sequences. Companies who've developed precision medicine products have to carefully evaluate patentability. They have to look at it from a lot of different considerations, specifically of genetic sequences, and consider potentially alternative strategies, such as method or modality patents and patents covering synthetic DNA constructs rather than sort of naturally occurring. There's sort of a patent issue around diagnostic methods and the identification of biomarkers. Patenting a diagnostic method and biomarker used in precision medicine creates sort of a unique challenge due to concerns around patent eligibility and utility. Courts have typically applied, again, in the US, where this is obviously very heavily litigated, have applied more stringent standards to assess patentability of diagnostics, particularly those based on natural correlations and observations. So companies have to demonstrate novelty, non-obvious utility in their diagnostic methods and biomarkers in order to obtain patent protection. So it's an extra hurdle to get over. Additionally, companies have to consider pursuing patent protection for companion diagnostics, which are essential for guiding personalized treatment decisions. So as we discussed last time, there's oftentimes the difference between traditional medicine and precision medicine is the introduction of a diagnostic whether that's genetic testing or something else. And so that companion diagnostic along with the biomarker or the modality may be something to consider for patents. There's also the issue around targeted therapies and pharmacogenomics, not an easy word to say. Targeted therapies and those kinds of interventions in precision medicine often involve identifying specific genetic targets and then developing the therapeutic agents tailored to individual patient characteristics. So it's sort of like a subpopulation. Securing patents for those kinds of novel therapeutics is essential from a business perspective to protecting investments in research and development. So you can imagine spending a significant amount of time identifying, biologics, gene therapies, any of these sort of novel therapeutics, and then not being able to protect that from a patent perspective is pretty demoralizing from an investment in research and development perspective. However, there are some very complex patent landscapes, including overlapping, patents and potential infringement risks, particularly in crowded therapeutic areas that need to be considered. So it's not an easy thing to obtain a patent and requires a significant investment in making sure that you have a clear patent right. There's also issues around global patent strategies. So obviously, like most intellectual properties, each country has its own regime, but oftentimes the things that we're talking about are global in nature. And so precision medicine companies often have to develop comprehensive global patent strategies to protect their intellectual property rights in key markets. And since patent laws and regulations vary worldwide, you have to navigate the differences in those criteria and the patent criteria. Patent examination procedures will be different, enforcement mechanisms will be different, so it could get quite complicated quite quickly. Filing patent applications in multiple jurisdictions, including places like the US, which is very common, Europe, China is also very common, in other emerging markets, can help secure broad patent protection and also deter potential competitors, but it's not an easy place to land. So overall, sort of navigating these IP and patent issues in precision medicine requires a strategic approach, to be sure, proactive IP management, so being on the front foot when it comes to these issues, collaboration with lots of legal experts specializing in this area. But by securing those robust patent portfolios and licensing those key technologies, precision medicine companies can protect their innovations and attract investment and drive that commercial success that everyone's chasing. But most importantly, get the medicines to patients as quickly as possible. Thanks for joining me. I'm Mina Frost, General Counsel for Sano Genetics, and if you'd like some more information on precision medicine, please visit Sano Genetics' website at sanogenetics.com. Thank you.